Welcome to the character design category for the Art Anime Awards 2022. This category celebrates the best character designs of the year, recognizing the creativity and attention to detail in the nominees' designs. From quirky and colorful to dark and brooding, the nominees represent a wide range of styles and aesthetics. Here are your nominees for Best Character Design of 2022.
Hi. この扱いのさ、明日のライブが今から想像できる。実はですね、私もいいね。めっちゃ可愛い。どうも。
すまなかったな。お前らだって人間のバカな争いに巻き込まれるのは不本意だったろう。終わりにしよう。
行くよみんな。
And the jury pick for Best Character Design in 2022 was Do It Yourself, Yusuke Matsuo. And your choice for Best Character Design in 2022 from the public vote? Cyberpunk Edgerunners, Yo Yoshinari.
Joining me to talk about character design this year is Ultimate Mega X. Hello.
Hello, it's wonderful to be here.
It's great to have you. Translator and noted KyoAni stan, as one should be. And on the jury side, we have Brad. Hello, Brad.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's no problem. Brad is our jury representative. He used to be a host in the past, but he realized how wrong of a decision that was. So for these production categories, we often want to start with like a quick overview of exactly what the element is, just because it can be kind of hard or easy to miss the kind of behind the scenes work that goes into making the shows that we love. So would you guys give just a quick overview of exactly what character design is and what makes a good character design? Is it just cool outfits?
Character design kind of is like your basic endpoint into the anime itself. You know, whenever you're looking at what should I watch, a lot of times you'll decide something based off of the characters and like how cool they look or what are they doing in this particular instance. You know, it's not necessary. It's one of those where it's a very important part, but sometimes it's difficult to explain. You know, character design, you not only have to kind of say how cool does this look, but you also need to make sure that you're not adding unnecessary work later on in the production pipeline. You may have like this character design that has a bunch of cool details in it, but every detail has to be replicated on every single sheet that character's on. So you look down the road and you say, hey, if this character is very detailed, can our in-between animator finish this in time for it to be broadcast? Or is that going to be an issue down the road? At the same time, you also have to abide by what the director is saying. You know, directors may want more simpler designs. They may want more detailed aspects and other parts of it, you know, to emphasize what that character is about. You know, they may say, hey, this character isn't going to necessarily wear this type of outfit, so why don't we try designing this outfit instead? Similarly, with our public vote, Cyberpunk Edgerunners, that came from a game. The character designer, Yo Yoshinari, had to make something that was originally in 3D fit into a 2D type landscape. and be able to kind of go with the different stylish vibes that anime can produce, as opposed to a game where you just have those 3D models. And so character designers, when they are adapting something that has a different original source, like a light novel, manga, or game, you have to be able to take what you see there and put it into kind of the same aspect for the anime where you're keeping the same essence of the character, but you might kind of omit some of these details if you're looking at a light novel illustration, because the illustrator can add in as much as they want, because it's just replicating maybe 6 times in a novel. Whereas in anime, that has to be put in every single frame. For manga, that character may appear in the same type of viewpoint. In anime, you also have to consider what's going on behind that. And so character design is quite actually one of the more complex things to take a look at when you're looking at production of an anime, but it's also one of the things that impresses you most as a viewer. It's one of those cool categories.
That makes so much sense. I mean, again, it's just so like ridiculous when you kind of consider all the work and all the little nuances that go into making something that looks good that you don't necessarily get at first pass. I mean, I guess that's why so many people in the Sakuga community talk about like silhouettes, right? Because they are just looking at what makes someone instantly recognizable rather than these kind of like other individual choices. I'm guessing that's exactly why do it yourself with its more like kind of simple designs that perhaps lend themselves more to animation won the juror side of the category. Is that right, Brad?
Yeah, pretty much. I think for our entire, basically, top half of our rankings, we can say that all of the animation designs in there were very fitting for, well, the animation itself, because of how little detail they really put on them and how easily they could morph them into something interesting through the entire run of their shows. Like, for example, with Tropical Rogue Precure, how the line work on every of the aesthetically pleasing designs could change from one episode to another depending on who the animation director was. But in the case of Do It Yourself, our jury winner, which was very, very beloved, like from basically day one of the awards when everyone checked it out and was like, yeah, this is an absolutely great show. You can really see how much attention was put into making every silhouette in there really distinct and how to make the shapes of our characters feel very unique on their own, on top of having some absolutely fantastic color work with them, like with their two-tone hair and with their general outfits, their design choices. And to top it all off, as you guys said, it's their designs that really lend themselves very nicely into animation, thanks to how easily, thanks to their thin line work, can you stretch them out and go over their base design sheets in order to enhance the animation itself. Even the colors themselves were largely dependent on who the animation director in the specific episode was, because they kept changing their shades in different ways depending on what the scene needed. So it's an aspect we really considered a lot in our final rankings for the category.
And I
Yeah.
really love just like the little like nuances too of just like how their character design reflects their personality. So like for example, the main character Yua, she like wears like her shirt like half tucked in, half tucked out. It's kind of like a disheveled like it's just little things like that that build up over time, you know.
Pretty much, they're very good tools to like get across our characters' personalities, and we think that DI, especially in this year for this fantastic year for character designs, was like the king of getting across who these characters really are just by looking at them. You just see, for example, Yua or 3D printer, and you immediately know who these characters are, what their personalities are, what their general attitudes towards even life are, and it's pretty exceptional at that point, pretty much.
Now, Mega X, kind of another juror or jury darling has been Yamano Susume. Year after year, it's always placed highly in those production categories. And interestingly enough, it shares a connection with Do It Yourself in this regard. Could you kind of talk about that?
Yeah, they actually share the same character designer, Yusuke Matsuo, also known as Fugo. You might ask, wait a minute, didn't the final season of Yama no Susume air at the same time Do It Yourself did? The answer is yeah, it kind of did, because production on that had a very generous time schedule, actually finished way ahead of time to allow Matsuo to devote himself fully to Do It Yourself. And kind of going back to Yama no Susume, that show actually ended up with 4 seasons. But Fugo, between seasons, would actually redesign the characters, depending, regardless of how short or how long it had been since the previous season. Not because he felt like it needed to be done for the narrative or anything like that, but more because he wanted to kind of design them in the way he was at that moment. Because he's the designer, the drawer, animator that's constantly evolving. So he would actually redesign all the characters in that show with new design sheets for every single season, because that was what's natural to him at that moment. He's not a designer or animator whose designs can stay consistent. He can't draw the same thing over and over again like some of these other designers can. He's someone that feels like this is most natural to me right now. And I feel like that's kind of one of those things that make it really wonderful and Do It Yourself, because that's who Fugo was in the mid 2022, and that kind of makes me happy that he won from the jury.
That's so interesting. I mean, just the idea of like kind of progressing your work as you evolve as an artist. I mean, if you take a look at, I mean, I know it's not even like nominated in this category, but if you take a look at Yamano Susume season 4, like you can totally tell that the design is like ever so subtly different, but it gives it just such a nice updated look. It's crazy to think about.
Yeah.
I will say that Yamano Susume was considered in character design category, and a lot of people, including me, were very high on it. But ultimately, as a category overall, we came to conclusion that we wanted to primarily focus on new designs. And even though there were arguments about how Yamano Susume and Fugo keeps changing up his base character design sheet from season to season, we still decided to basically, instead of that, give shoutouts to completely new franchises that introduced some completely new ideas in terms of character designs this year.
And Fugo actually influenced another designer on this list. He influenced Kazuaki Shimada, the character designer for Spy Family. In fact, if it wasn't for Fugo, who knows if Shimada would have continued on in the industry, because they worked together kind of early on, and his impression on Shimada kept him in the industry.
Wow, so it's kind of like a mentor-student dynamic?
A little bit like that, kind of like you influenced me, and like seeing the way that you worked helped me say, hey, I could continue on and do this. And so Shimada kept going and going, and now he's designer for his own show in this bracket, in this
Man.
production.
I would have never known. I mean, who knew? I guess the animation world is pretty small, huh?
It can be small, but it also can be very large at the same time. Like, we have so many international artists starting to work in anime and doing production design.
Cool. Okay, I'm trying to think of a transition, but I can't.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. I mean, that was a great point.
Hmm.
Now, Brad, just to go back to jury deliberation, when you think about character design and what Mega X brought up before as well, a lot of it is adaptation, right? You're taking a source material and you're kind of reiterating it into an animation form. How much did you talk about how well they did the adaptation of certain stuff? Like Bocchi to Rock is a manga, Dress Up Darling is a manga, etc.
Well, admittedly, we didn't look at character designs as direct adaptations of their source material. For example, in terms of Spy X Family, while there were some comparisons brought up with the manga, we didn't exactly look at them. Can I have a second? My cat is trying to leave my room. 1 second.
No, you're fine. That's what they do.
It happens.
Oh my god, this little bastard. What was I saying? Okay. Yeah, so for example, in the case of Spy X Family, we were mentioning how Shimada was giving the manga original designs his own spin that was fitting the animation of the show rather well, but it wasn't like the primary point that we were focusing on. For example, with My Dress Up Darling, I don't think like the manga comparisons were brought up at all, but it was still a series we really loved because of how intricate its attention to clothing and detail in characters who are cosplaying throughout the show was, and how, despite a rather huge amount of details in their clothes, still managed to work very well in terms of animation direction throughout the entire series. When the show really allowed it to move in interesting ways.
Sure, you were looking at the clothes.
Yeah, I
The
promise.
clothes design.
Very
No,
important.
It really is. It almost felt like My Dress Up Darling, it reflects this category because you see Wakana design the character outfits for Marin. You know, you get to see all the little details, especially in the one where he has to adapt the chibi design to fit Marin, where he has to think of all these details and how it would actually work in a real life person. So it's kind of like a best representation of this category.
Oh my god, I didn't know we were gonna go meta. It's a show that involves character design in character design. But no, that's you know, that's actually a really good point I had not considered. And speaking of, you know, the reason that the adaptations came to mind in the first place is just because, you know, Cyberpunk is kind of like the ultimate adaptation. Like when it got announced that Trigger was going to be doing Cyberpunk, everyone was like, "Oh my god!" And you know, I don't think they could have picked a better studio, really, because Trigger is really known for almost more like Western style animation, right? I know when Little Witch Academia came out, everyone was saying, you know, this could have been a cartoon a la Adventure Time or something.
Yeah, in terms of Cyberpunk, it was a show that was absolutely stellar on pretty much every production front, and the way in which Yo Yoshinari approached these designs was both really anime in its philosophy, but still had this entire Western aesthetic applied on top of itself through the cyberpunk setting, which was really reflected in the show and its designs, like with how there was a very like large amount of shape differences between the entire main cast, and how everyone had this amount of neon lights aesthetic to them in their clothes and in plus their general appearance. So Cyberpunk was also a series that we really appreciated on pretty much every level when it comes to character designs, and also how good they were at striking a great pose within the show, because as it is with Imaishi and Trigger as a whole, their animation style is very focused on striking the great pose when it comes to translating the animation very well. So Cyberpunk was pretty great at it, and in how these designs, even though they might look very detailed at first glance, still manage to have their own personality depending on who the animation director of specific episode was with. For example, the fantastic episode 6 by Ikarashi, where the bulky designs we've seen throughout the show were really much thinner and much more human, so to say, which was also really appreciated by the jury overall.
Do you have any behind the scenes insights on Trigger staff, Mega X?
Unfortunately, I do not.
No, it's
Like
fine.
I
thought I'd throw it out.
like you mentioned, it's KyoAni Stan, not Trigger Stan.
exactly.
Good enough.
But kind of going into a little bit of the opposite direction of Cyberpunk, I'd say Chainsaw Man had a very interesting take on adapting the designs from the manga that was perhaps a little bit more comedic and a little bit more exaggerated into a more live-action drama-esque coming off from the director. So I feel like that kind of went into an interesting direction, one that you could argue maybe wasn't necessarily the best one to go in for the franchise, but I mean, when the director saw the inspiration for what Fujiyama did in the manga, you know, I think trying to capture the live action influences was a very fascinating way to say, this is how I see this show.
And it's funny how that works, right? How one person's like, you never really think about how one person's vision of what they want to accomplish interacts with something like a source material and how it ultimately gets adapted into anime. And it's funny because Chainsaw Man. There's been this kind of ongoing debacle where apparently, supposedly, fans are very disappointed. Like the Blu-ray sales, they sold like 400 Blu-rays or something. But if you take
1400.
1400, okay, that makes more sense. Otherwise, it would be Flip Flappers meme. But at the same time, though, pretty much in every category in these public awards, it's ranked highly. So
Mhm.
it ultimately it can't matter that much, I suppose.
I think your fans are going to be fans regardless of it. And I think, kind of as a fan, it might be interesting to see this other take on the same material rather than just replicate it one to one.
Yeah, it's definitely a valid take to have on the sense of adaptation and like translating these more, well, shonen and maybe a bit comedic designs in their original nature into this live action feel where they all feel so grounded and realistic. It wasn't exactly a view that our jury generally loved, but we also have to mention that it was an absolutely fantastic year for character designs overall. And even though Chainsaw Man ended up on the very last place for us, it was still a show with some decent fans of its character designs and how interesting of a take it was on this entire, as I've mentioned, shonen aesthetic. But simply we thought that the entire rest of our nominees were just stronger or had more personality to them, because the one complaint that pretty much everyone had about Chainsaw Man was on top of its drab art style and color, which you could argue was the point, but still wasn't very appealing, clashed and was rather jarring when compared with, for example, this design of Power with her long pink hair and a bit of a monster face, which just came off as a conflict of interest between what the designs actually were meant to be and how the adaptation made them out to look like in this very realistic setting.
Well, I think that's a great place to end it. Or do you guys have anything that you have like a burning desire to talk about before we end?
Yes.
Ooh.
We have not mentioned this, and I would not be the fan I am if I did not mention Licorice Recoil with Imigi Muru. Imigi Ruru is actually a mangaka. So they're used to drawing, somewhat easy designs so that they can finish a chapter really quickly. But they got asked to design the characters for Licorice Recoil. And director Shingo Adaichi did something clever. He said, here are the concepts of these characters. Here's these drafts. Like, beforehand, they kind of had, like, images that they had in mind for these characters. Adaichi never showed that to Muru. He just kept them hidden and said, you do your own take. And Muru came with the characters that he came up with. Adaichi only had 2 requests. He wanted Takina to be long black hair, and he wanted Mika to be African. And those were his only 2 requests. Muru was able to come up with the rest of the designs himself, which I found very, very fascinating. Adaichi helped design in a way to say, this is what we're looking for as an animator for reference sheets, but the actual design itself was kind of really cool for this original animation, because usually you'll get like a famous illustrator or something to draw like, here's my take on the designs, and then you get someone else to design it for the animation aspect. They didn't have that. It just immediately went to animation from Muru's designs.
No, I'm really glad that we were able to sneak that in before we ended, because that was something that I would have never imagined or known in a million years. That's so interesting.
Yeah, it's really cool. This doesn't necessarily need to go in, but like Chisato's design has a big chest. Adaichi,
I was
No,
actually thinking
it's
about
true.
asking about that, and I was like, I don't know if I should or not.
Adaichi in the booklet for Sword Art Online Extra Edition mentions that his favorite parts of that aspect were Suguha and looking at like whenever she was floating, how her chest acted in the water.
That's my
Oh.
goat. That's
And
my goat.
so he was very focused on Suguha's chest, and when I saw Chisato, I was like, "This isn't a Daichi anime. I know this instantly."
You know,
But it wasn't. It wasn't actually him that did that.
famously Miyazaki said that Nausicaa had to have a big chest because it kind of symbolized her like kind of motherly. He wanted something so that people could rest their heads in and feel comforted.
Well, I can also say I'm a Sword Art Online fan as well, so I know that Suguha having a big chest is actually the result of the editor Kazuma Miki, because he's like, we don't have a character with a big chest. We can put her as that character and have that be, the main aspect of her character.
Oh no, she was a quota fill.
And which leads to the hilarity of, wait, your younger sister's supposed to look like Silica from that story, and now she looks like this. Which
Well, on
prompts
that
the
note-
hilarity of that. Which
I
adds
wanna-
into interesting on character designs and how they can be influenced by so many different things.
Thank you for bringing it back around.
Thanks, Wilson, for ending right after you've mentioned Rikoreko, because I was about to go off biased as hell about its rather low placement in jury rankings, but I stopped myself. I didn't mention it much.
Well, no, go ahead.
Yeah.
Like, what? So, why? What were you gonna say?
No, not much. Basically, that I'm biased and it should be higher in the jury rankings, but the sixth place is still fine.
I mean, to be honest, when you first think of it for me, I just think of the uniforms. I'm like, they're just all these, they're just uniforms. But then I forgot that the whole thing is that they like have a cafe and they have the really nice cafe outfits, and then they actually do change clothes quite often throughout the series. So
Yeah,
And
their
then the
wardrobe is
opening.
very impressive, and in the opening too. There's
Yeah,
a lot of very nice clothing with Chisato and Takina, and how they fit their blue and red general color coding, and how it just balances really well with between them and also with the red of the main cast with Mika and the other girls, which I found really impressive. But at the end of the day, it's mainstream art style, so we can't have it higher than Precure. Sorry.
Yeah, understandable. Although the designs of the uniforms actually came from Idol outfits with SKE 48 and Nogazaki 48 as well.
That I didn't
nice,
know.
nice Sony link in there, Annie Pletz.
Oh, I forgot to mention. I was gonna mention that I was gonna mention that I recently bought a Rebecca plushie that is being sold by Good Smile.
Let's
'cause
go.
It looks so good, right?
Mhm.
Like it's got like all of her tattoos are like faithfully recreated. But then I was gonna feel bad about only mentioning Cyberpunk, so I was gonna mention that if you buy the do-it-yourself Blu-ray, you can get like a screwdriver or something.
Yeah. I think we covered like 9 out of 10. I think the only ones we didn't mention was Ranking of Kings.
Yeah.
And Akebi.
I was gonna briefly
yeah,
talk
Akabi.
about.
Yeah.
I was briefly gonna talk about Bochi because
You mentioned Bochi in the beginning, or one of you did.
Okay.
So
Well,
Bochi was mentioned.
It's just
But-
but they're mostly school uniforms, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah. I'm actually happy with that because I didn't really have a lot to say about the botch, and that goes for most of the jury. Basically, the sentiment was that, yeah, it's good, but we voted it 7th and moved on with our lives.
Well, why do you think the public liked it so much, or is it just because they just click on shows they like?
It shows
no.
they like him recency.
That's true, but I also think there are some interesting things about Bocchi's designs, like with Bocchi herself, with her pink tracksuit and her Ukraine hair thingy. Like, there's a lot of strong color coding that may be on the simple side, but makes every character distinguishable at very first glance. So that's also cool about
You know,
it.
and now that you think about it, it's pretty important because they often do that kind of like mixed media kind of thing, where if they change her and do like a freaking like orange or something, you have to like still recognize that it's her.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a pretty great aspect of it as well, but it's pretty sad that it goes only as far as with Bocchi's design, because everyone else doesn't really like get that treatment, except maybe for Kita at Viewpoint, but that's about it.
I mean, like, I'm gonna be honest, like most of my thoughts about Bocchi's character design are just how hot the adults are. freaking older sister, goth girl, drunk, like they're all like crazy. But maybe
the thing about Bocchi is like that's more the production side that I find interesting, just with the way that they've kind of varied Bocchi for reactions and all the work that the character designer did to make sure that the anime actually aired on time. Like how many cuts he drew. Like that's
You did.
that to me is where I think of Bochi much more than like specifically design. So I'm not surprised to see it 7th on the Jura rankers.
I
On
see.
the rankings.
Irara is a madman.
Yeah.
On that note, I mean, thank you so much for coming by and giving these wonderful insights. If you guys want to see more of these wonderful insights, you can go check out their blog at ultimatemegax.wordpress.com. What I really appreciate is that you've been doing some, or at least in the past, some kind of translations of really old interviews from like early 2000s. It's always interesting to go back and see exactly what their thoughts were around that time. I just read the Endless 8 one.
Yeah, if you look at my Twitter profile, my pinned tweet has my translation master list, which has all the translations I've done and where they are because they've been like on my blog, on Sakagaburu, on Tumblr, and different places, and I just feel like I just put them one place, people can find it.
Of course.
So
Yeah.
it's in a Google Sheets thing.
So check that out after the stream. All right. See you, Mega X. See you, Brad.
Yeah, thanks. See ya.
Thank you.
On to the next category.